Welcome, everybody. And we're glad that you could join us. We're glad to have so many Save the Sound folks in the room. We'll make for a really robust conversation about Agua de El Yunque, the film that is the subject of this conversation tonight. So before we dive in, I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Anthony Allen. I work at Save the Sound. Happily, I'm the ecological communications specialist. And also tonight, this is a special session for me because we're doing this environmental film club's session as part of another project I'm involved with here in New Haven. That's a direct response to COVID-19 called At Home in New Haven. So this and many other sessions are being hosted and co-promoted through the At Home in New Haven website. So we're very happy to welcome all of you to this space, and just want to let everyone know that we are recording. So feel free to turn on or off your video accordingly. And with that, I will turn it over to the wonderful Melissa Schlag, who is our climate advocate at Save the Sound and is going to be facilitating, moderating the conversation this evening. So take it away, Melissa.
Thanks, Anthony. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us this is our second film club event, Agua de El Yunque. I'm Melissa Schlag. As Anthony said, I'm the Save the Sound climate advocate. Well, before we get started, I have some housekeeping logistics to go over. I'll ask everyone to mute themselves throughout the discussion. Thank you. You're all muted. Good job. There will be opportunities to speak throughout the discussion, and then you can unmute yourself. As Anthony said, we are recording this webinar, so you or anyone who missed it can actually check it out on our website. And that location is savethesound.org/stay-engaged. savethesound.org/stay-engaged. We'll have our panelists answer a question about the film, and then you can jump in with your questions or comments. You can use the raise your hand feature or write your question in the chat. You can find the raise your hand icon if you click on the participants button on the bottom of your Zoom screen near the chat option, and a new box will pop up where you'll find the blue hand icon. But if you write your comments in the chat, I'll see it and I'll ask you to either speak it or I can ask the question to the panelists. And just a quick note that this is a new film series. It's not necessarily directly about our work, but it's a way to have a discussion about with you about what's going on environmentally around the world and how it might compare with the Long Island Sound region and fit in with our work. We do other webinars specifically about our work, and you can find that on the Stay Engaged page that I mentioned earlier. And finally, a big thanks to At Home in New Haven and Anthony for this opportunity and their fabulous work helping out during these unsettling times. Anthony is a founder of At Home in New Haven and was also happens to be our ecological communications specialist. Congratulations on your first week. Now a little bit about Save the Sound, for those of you who don't know about us. We're a nonprofit based in Connecticut and New York, and we do a little bit of everything, from legislative advocacy and legal action to engineering, environmental monitoring, and hands-on volunteer efforts. We restore and protect all that impacts the Long Island Sound region's environment, from rivers and shorelines to wetlands and forests, from the air we breathe to the waters of the Sound itself. And we just celebrated our 40th anniversary last year. All right, let's put on our rain gear and head to El Yunque. A couple of interesting facts about El Yunque. El Yunque National Forest Wilderness Area is the only tropical forest wilderness in the United States National Forest System. It's made up of 28,000 acres, which is about 44 square miles. It's the largest block of public land in Puerto Rico. It's also the freshwater source for nearly 1 million residents. 1 million, that's a lot, or about 20% of the entire population of Puerto Rico. Let's introduce our panelists. We have an exciting group for you guys tonight. First, we have Nicole Davis. Welcome, Nicole. our watershed coordinator for the ecological restoration team. She's currently coordinating the implementation of projects from the watershed plans for New Haven Harbor. She also manages Save the Sounds residential and edible rain garden programs and is involved in our green infrastructure work in Connecticut. Next, we have Alex Crofta. Welcome, Alex. Our ecological restoration project manager. He's currently focused on aquatic connectivity, which right now is removal of dams and other barriers and installation of fishways or fish ladders over the dams that can't be removed. Then we have Elena Colon, who will jump in to talk about mussels. Elena is an environmental analyst who is coordinating our community science program. She also works on our Western Sound Bacteria Monitoring Program and the Sound-Wide Unified Water Study. She actually has family in Puerto Rico and has hiked in El Yunque. She was just in the office today mixing cement. So thank you for all your hard work, especially with the Unified Water Study starting now. Thanks for joining us. And last but not least, we have the infamous Save the Sound soundkeeper, Bill Lucy. I like to refer to him as our pollution Popeye. He drives a boat around the Sound looking for polluters and connects people and legislators in an effort to clean up the Sound and restore it to its former glory. Before we get to the first question, I'd like to have Nicole actually explain what a watershed actually is for context of this conversation.
Thanks, Melissa. This is, it's a term that's tossed around a lot, but a lot of people don't actually know what a watershed is. So a watershed is really any area of land that drains to a river or stream. And everybody and every place is within a watershed. So it's where that raindrop falls and rolls either through groundwater or a storm drain or a little teeny stream into a bigger stream and into a river and ultimately a larger body of water.
That's great. Thanks, Nicole. It's pretty clear that watersheds are critical to our existence. I think what struck me most about the film is the students learning about the watershed and where their water actually comes from. We all take for granted that we just turn on the faucet and magical water comes out. Most of us forget that the dinosaurs drank the same water we're drinking today. All the water we have right now is all we're going to get, and Mother Nature isn't making any more. So as the students said in the film, water is life. With that said, I'd like to ask our panelists the first question. What struck you about the film? And after our panel answers, I'll open it up to everyone else to either comment, add in what struck them the most, or ask a question of our panelists. Alex, let's start with you. What struck you the most about this film?
Thanks. I thought it was great the way they pointed out the physical and functional connection between the uplands and the water that was reaching, in their case, the estuary, and then the ocean in general. So in the Sound region, we have water that falls all the way in Canada and comes down through the Connecticut River and makes it to the Sound in that way. Hang on one second.
I think he has a needy cat there. We mostly hear dogs barking, never a cat meowing.
Sorry about that. So that's like a really dramatic, it's a long example. It's like a very far distance. But equally important is the water that falls anywhere in the watershed, as Nicole said. So any water that falls on any piece of ground, any woodland area, or any place makes it to the Sound in this region. So I thought that was an interesting connection, and it struck me that they were pointing that out.
Great, thanks, Alex.
Sure.
How about you, Bill?
Yeah, what struck me was at the top of the stream, how clear the water was. You could see everything was intact, the forest was intact, the stream side vegetation, and it was just full of shrimp. And there was a lot of shrimp. There were also a lot of different kinds of shrimp. And that's just it's a good argument for why we have to have protected places, especially in the upper headwaters. It's rare to find streams in good condition these days in much of the world. And since that's national forests, you can't build houses up in there. So that's the way the stream should look. And having examples of the way things are supposed to be unimpacted. It's a way to avoid the shifting baseline syndrome, which I call it, where successive generations see a slightly more degraded environment and they accept what is healthy and functioning, what actually isn't healthy and functioning. So we need to make sure we keep examples of those habitats across the entire globe. So that was the most striking component for me.
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, we can't move the goalpost as we're playing the game. Nicole, what did you find most interesting?
I thought it was really interesting how they incorporated the students' perspective into it. How close those students live to the forest and to this area that creates their drinking water, and how they hadn't really been there before, and that it was apparent that, you know, this was a system that they hadn't really talked about or seen, or wasn't part of their everyday life, even though they live right next door to it. And I kind of like what Bill said. I think we get used to the environment around us and don't always think about outside. And a lot of people don't think about where their water comes from or what happens to the water after it leaves their house.
Yeah, it's an important lesson. And those 15 or so students out of the million population in that area, hopefully more, they keep that program going. I think it's important to learn when you're young, these lessons.
I think it's really impactful too for people to see it firsthand. I mean, you can read about it in a book or watch a movie, but when you actually see it and you're in the water and see the shrimp, it really has a long-lasting impact.
Yeah, that's great. Well, let's open up to the audience. Does anyone have a question for our panelists so far, or have an observation that they would like to talk about? Anyone?
I
Laura.
would jump in and just echoing what Nicole just said. I mean, my first sort of awareness of the natural world as a kid was a school program we did in 5th grade that was not dissimilar to this. We're actually studying a little stream behind the local high school, but we did sort of rudimentary water testing, and we looked for invertebrates in the bottom of the stream, and we learned a little bit about riparian buffers and how having vegetation along the stream protects the water quality. And it's something that I forget about that class most of the time, and then every once in a while I see something like this video and it reminds me that that's probably what put me on my current career path. And it's cool to think about that with those kids too, that they might have had sort of the same experience, and 20, 30 years down the line, be working in a field that's trying to protect exactly the resources they got to see. So not a question, just an echo.
That's great. Yeah, no, I mean, those memories stick with us, and if we can get that work to every student, they'll remember it hopefully as they get older, and that builds momentum to saving our environment and our water. Anybody else have anything to add, or a good memory like Laura shared?
I wanted to add, actually watching the kids walking into the water, shirts and all, collecting the river shrimp, was really nostalgic, and it made me think, you know, I grew up catching crayfish. My father, you know, was born in Arecibo in Puerto Rico, and he came over here as a kid to, you know, to Pennsylvania eventually. But my uncle and my aunts, we would often go to local parks where there were streams, and it was very common. We just go right in, take our shoes off, shorts, shirts, just like those kids, and catch crayfish. And so it was very nostalgic. Oddly enough, it was really great to see the children being taught the connection of the shrimp and the water quality. I actually called my dad yesterday, and I asked him, like, did you know that the river shrimp, you know, they're filter feeders and they travel up, you know, from the estuary into the freshwater? He's like, no, I know, I like to eat them. And So which made me think I'm, definitely his daughter, because when I went to El Yunque years ago, the thing that I remember is eating the good food. But it just, at least, even though I did not understand the connection to water quality and the shrimp, I most certainly had a love of nature. And it's what, got me into environmental science. But, and also interestingly, we have our own filter feeders here in Connecticut and New York. We have freshwater mussels. Sadly, not a lot of people know too much about freshwater mussels. They are the coolest animals. Unfortunately, they are the most endangered animal in North America. I think about 70% or over 70% are endangered. And they're our own filter feeders. They can filter, one mussel can filter about 10 gallons a day. And if you had a 6-mile stretch of a mussel bed, they can filter out over 25 tons of particulates a year. So it's kind of unfortunate that, like the river shrimp, dams and pollution and things like climate change, like due to floods and droughts, affecting things maybe like the salt line moving further up into the river, has diminished the population greatly. In Connecticut, there's one species, a yellow lamp mussel, which is, they think it's presumed extinct in Connecticut. It hasn't been seen in 80 years. So, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, there's a lot of cool factoids about freshwater mussels. But yeah, dams. So one of the interesting things about mussels is their reproductive cycle. So I don't know if most know, unlike the shrimp, who do actually move up the stream from the estuary, mussels are sedentary, so they don't get to move around, but they do rely on what we call fish hosts, which, are things like around here, the alewife and American eel. They're anadromous, so they go up into the freshwater from the estuary. And so if they, if there are dams in the way, they can't make their way up into the freshwater. And mussels actually, they essentially parasitize the gills of the fish with their little babies. And the fish are the ones that kind of move around. And after about 3 weeks, the little baby mussels will then fall off. And that's the only way really for mussels to reproduce. So that's how they're affected. So yeah, dams are really not good for them.
Wow, it's fascinating. Yeah, similar to the shrimp. I think there's only one river in Puerto Rico that does not have a dam on it. So it's interesting about mussels and the connection with or the similarities with the shrimp and the filter feeders and cleaning our water.
Yeah. And because of that, like what I found really interesting was the fact at the beginning when they pointed out that they've been surveying and counting the shrimp since the 1980s. I was like, wow, like what a wealth of information. And therefore, as filter feeders, they make really good indicator species of water quality. And that is exact same with freshwater mussels. They can live to be 100 years old. So they also are really good indicator species of water quality.
Wow. Who knew about the little mussel?
Yeah, they're I've carried some that they're tiny, some are really small, and some are bigger than my hand.
Wow.
They can be around 100 years old. I used to survey them up in the Delaware River in the Philadelphia region. So it was snorkeling in the river. Some parts were pretty not great, but yeah.
Thank you. That's great,
Yep.
Elena.
Mm-hmm.
You are the mussel queen. Does anybody else have any observations from the film or want to share a memory of their connection with water?
Well, I'm not a scientist, so what really opened my eyes, I think, about this was that like at the head of the river, at the top of this mountain, that there were animals keeping the water clean. I always thought of it as plants up there that would be keeping the water clean, that the water would be filtering through the forest and coming and starting clean. But the notion that there's all these animals in the water right up there doing the cleaning work was kind of eye-opening to me.
Yeah, it's a very good point. Good observation. Anybody else? Before we move on to the second question? Okay. So how do you all think that this film connects to our work in the Long Island Sound region? Elena explained the mussels. Bill, let's start with you. How does this film connect with your work?
Well, my job is basically to pursue swimmable, drinkable, fishable water. I'm also part of the Waterkeeper Alliance, and that's their motto. So that stream in the National Forest in Puerto Rico was very clean. It was fishable. It was swimmable. So that's our goal. That's what we want to see all across Long Island Sound. And we do it through a number of ways. I drive around in a boat, which gives us visibility and reminds people that if they see pollution, they can give us a call. And that's how we find a lot of problems, is we get calls from what we term watchdogs, but concerned citizens call all the time and say, someone's filling a wetland, someone's dumping, someone's throwing tires in a swamp, and that gives us a place to start looking for issues. Or there's a smelly culvert, and that's really the bread and butter. We want the clean water. So we do a lot of work with the state and the EPA to find problems. We work with municipalities, and we try and push for upgrading sewage treatment plants. Our collection systems that bring the sewage to the treatment plants are old. They break and spill sewage in the Sound all the time. So we work very closely to either through the courts or through assisting finding funding to get those cleaned up. We have a big goal called Sewage-Free Long Island Sound that also involves getting rid of what are called combined sewer overflows, CSOs for short. That's where the rainwater mixes with sewage in these old systems, and it's too much for the sewage treatment plants to handle. It's millions and millions of gallons, and they pop out in all these side channels and go right into rivers in Long Island Sound. And of course, when you have a situation like that, let's say in Hartford, it's far from Long Island Sound, but if that wasn't going on, you would have a much more pristine situation. So again, if we know what healthy looks like, all these other actions we take trying to clean up different points of pollution are towards that vision. And there's one big news item that just happened last week. There was a Supreme Court decision that said if you are discharging a pollutant in the groundwater and it goes to the ocean or to a river and it's easily traceable, you have to have a discharge permit. In the past, you did not. So the case was in Maui, and they have a lot of lava tubes there, and the county of Maui was discharging millions of gallons of partially treated sewage into the ground, and it was making its way down to the beaches and showing up out in those salt water where everyone's swimming and causing these big algae blooms. And what that means for us directly for our work here is we have a case that was stayed in federal court pending the Maui case was in the 9th District Court, and it was accepted by the Supreme Court. So any case that was related to that, including ours, which is dealing with septic systems polluting Long Island's aquifer, because they have hundreds of thousands of sewage cesspools and septic tanks over there that are leaching into the sand of Long Island, making their way to the Sound and polluting the drinking water. And we have a case to try and sue over that to get that to stop. It was stayed by this court decision, and unbelievably, the Supreme Court went our way. So now we have a whole new tool. And the last thing I'll mention is we use the Clean Water Act to do all our work, basically. We have a team of attorneys on staff, and the component of the Clean Water Act is that we are all We all have standing in court. We're all citizens of the United States of America. If you, as an industry or an entity, are polluting the water, you're polluting my water, your water, everybody's water. And if I don't like that and I have legal evidence or scientific evidence that it's a problem, I can go to court. And that's how we've been cleaning up these sewage treatment plants for 30 years. We use the Clean Water Act and we say, you're violating your permit, clean it up. And they do.
That's wonderful news. That's great. Thanks for all your work, Bill.
Sure.
Nicole, what about you? What do you think the connections are?
I think one of the big connections is with the watershed work. So much of it is about getting people to realize the impact that what we do on land has on water quality. And a lot of the projects we try to identify are visible projects that clean stormwater and these systems that kind of mimic natural filtration systems, which is what green infrastructure is. And I think this really showcased kind of what the shrimp are doing or what we're trying to mimic. We use mainly plants, but it's also by building these diverse ecosystems within a river that these filter feeder communities can bounce back in some of our impaired waterways. And then, I mean, it's already what I talked about is what struck me, but also just showing people the river and what a clean, healthy system can look like and why we want to restore it to natural function. And really getting people to think about that connection between them and the water. Because like you said, this is all we have. So we really need to be mindful of what we're doing with it.
Thanks, Nicole. Thanks for all your work, keeping our water clean. Alex, how about you? What do you think the connections are for you?
Definitely the aquatic connectivity. So a lot of what I do is work on, connecting river segments that are, disjointed by a dam or some other barrier. And yeah, sort of promoting, everyone thinks of like salmon as swimming upstream, but there's a lot of other creatures that do that. Smaller fish like alewife, eels that have been mentioned, shrimp in the case of this film, and we're not restoring for shrimp, but we are restoring for these other creatures. And like alewife is a pretty nondescript, not well-known fish, but it's a hugely important forage fish out in the sound, and then also its young, as when they're in the in the upstream habitat, are food for other species in the freshwater system. So it's a really important link, that aquatic connectivity for functional sort of like physical processes like the movement of sediment as well as the movement of nutrients, and then also that biotic element, the fish. And I think something that people don't often think about is the importance to climate, and as different as habitats are changing, becoming warmer, becoming more disturbed, species that aren't necessarily migratory are still going to need to migrate. If a pool is becoming warmer or shallower through drought, brook trout that inhabit that pool are going to need to move upstream or downstream or whatever it is to find suitable habitat. So removing those barriers, sort of as they were alluding to in this film, that's a big connection to what I do, I would say.
That's great. Thanks for bringing up climate change too. That's a huge factor for everything that we do. And a lot of people don't realize that Long Island Sound itself is warming faster than 99% of global oceans. And sea level rise is affecting it now and in the very close future, not distant future anymore. So we have to be mindful of all of this for ourselves and for the species. And the species that we look at, especially the alewives, I mean, those are indicators of what's going on, as you mentioned, Alex. Anybody else want to answer that question of how this film connects with the Long Island Sound area and region? Nobody. Okay. Well,
Can I just add real quick back to the mussels? Alex, you brought up the alewife. There is, I don't know if anyone knows, but there is a mussel native to this area called the Alewife Loader. And that's because it likes the alewife to use as a fish host. So
Wow.
It's like, so people commonly think like, yes, the alewife is like food for, other animals, but it's not the only purpose it serves. So.
Fun fact. Thank you.
That's great. Good to know.
I imagine you could probably overlap the loss of alewives in a stream because of a connectivity problem like a dam and the decline of certain species of mussels. They're probably hand in hand.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's absolutely. Definitely some certain fish are not as picky, but some mussels are not as picky, but some mussels are very specific about the fish. And they actually, you'll have to look it up on YouTube, but some of them have fishing lures where they stick out and it looks like a little fish to attract the bigger fish, so that they can blast them in the face with a bunch of their little babies.
That's very interesting. Laura, did you have something to add?
I did, but I don't know how I can follow up a mussel blasting fish in the face with its baby. I was just going to talk about trees. Yeah. Well, and I mean, folks already said this a little bit, but the connection I keep thinking about too is filtration of drinking water, which, I mean, the forests in Connecticut and New York obviously look very different, but fill some of the same functions for us. And in Connecticut, anyway, and I'm less familiar with this in New York. Although I know a lot of New York City's drinking water, for example, comes from the forested lands in upstate New York that are then piped down. But in Connecticut, anyway, a lot of the some of the biggest landowners in the state are the drinking water companies, and it's because they have a vested interest in all the trees around the reservoirs, filtering what eventually becomes our drinking water. And both having like a forest buffer there stops pollutants from cars or yards or whatever from getting in, and the trees and the soils and et cetera also act as a filter themselves, so the water gets cleaner and cleaner as it goes into the reservoirs. So yeah, that I thought was a neat connection to what we see here. Different kinds of forests and different rivers that look quite different in some ways, but the same mechanisms cleaning the water there.
Yeah, good insights. We need the forest, we need the species, we need all of it. Impacts our water quality. And we touched a little bit on it earlier. Everybody kind of mentioned a little bit about this, but Nicole, I'd like to ask you what you think the significance of like the ecosystem balance is. And for example, why is it important for all three shrimp to be present in El Yunque?
Yeah, that was actually my other favorite part of the film, was that they highlighted that, each of these shrimp really had their own function within the system and maintaining that balance. They had shredders and predators and filter feeders. And we see that in pretty much all natural systems, going back to elementary school, food webs. You take out one little corner of that food web and it has huge impacts. And we see that a lot in water quality in Long Island Sound with eutrophication, and kind of tying into what Laura was talking about, nutrients from people's lawns and golf courses and things that are right on the river where there aren't any buffers, washing their ways through the river and causing these big algal blooms that can really wreak havoc on fish populations by sucking up oxygen and creating these big hypoxic zones. And the fact that they were monitoring all three shrimp species, I thought was really significant. And kind of Elena had touched on it too, the fact that they've been collecting that data for so long can really show these huge changes in populations.
Yeah, we need that bigger picture to keep perspective. So definitely that data is important. And I think with our unified water study and our Long Island Sound report card and our beach report card, we're working to collect all of this information for the next generation to use as well. So we hope to one day be where El Yunque is with their data.
And macroinvertebrates are not the sexy animals that everybody wants to talk about, but they're so important to our ecosystems.
Yeah. Well, that actually is a perfect segue. Alex, I have a question for you. How do invertebrates, not just fish, factor into the restoration work you do?
I'd love to learn more, honestly, about the invertebrates. Where most of the restoration that we do is sort of with fish in mind. And I didn't even know that there was an Alewife Floater mussel. We're wrapping up a fishway in Brantford, North Brantford, that's going to allow Alewife to swim up the farm river. I didn't even know about this mussel, so it's really cool. Yeah, I think there's so many like tiny little connections and tiny little, actually small species that are part of these ecosystems that we're working to restore. And it's hard to be an expert in all of that stuff or to even know the half of it. So I think looking at that functionality and then just like focusing on the functionality, because it is going to benefit a lot more than just what you're thinking of sort of on the surface level. So yeah, I'd love to learn more. I know that the invertebrate sampling, DEP has an invertebrate sampling program where they look at the species composition of those different, stone flies and mayfly larvae and things like that live in, clean streams or not so clean or dirty, and they can assess it through that methodology. So yeah, I'm just interested to learn more about that stuff.
Interesting. Bill, do you have anything else to add from your experiences? You've lived in Hawaii, you've been all around the world, Alaska. Anything that you drawn from your experience?
It was always kind of like Elena. It was sort of nostalgic to see that movie. We had I was with a program in the Peace Corps in Guatemala from 1992 to 94. And we did freshwater shrimp aquaculture. So we would construct ponds that were associated with vegetable gardens and small animals. And so there you're trying to get algae blooms. So the small animals, you take the extra food and waste, which would make the pond green, and we would stock them with tilapia and then a native fish called wapote, which would keep the tilapia numbers down so they didn't get stunted. And then we would drain the pond every 6 months and take all the goo and fertilize the gardens, which could then feed people and the animals. It's called Integrated Agricultural Systems. And they started this new program where they took macrobrachiums, which that was the big predator shrimp in the stream. I think that was Macrobrachium americanus, kind of like a giant crayfish. We were using Macrobrachium rosenbergi as the Latin name. They're the Indonesian one that do really well in aquaculture and can handle horrific water quality. So we would the University of Guatemala trained us how to raise these things. And you have to mimic them going from fresh water to salt water to breed, just like they did in the movie. And you do that in these big tanks and you change the salinity, and they go through, I think, 5 instars, which is they'll go through metamorphosis, these shrimp, as they get big enough to the point where then they'll go back up the river and become adults and then go back and forth to breed. And then we would just throw them in the ponds and they would grow out. But during that, we caught one of the wild ones, and you can't use the wild ones in the movie for aquaculture because they're ferocious. They will eat each other. You can't have them anywhere near each other. They are like the lions of the Serengeti in the shrimp world, or the wolves out on the plains with the bison or the caribou. So it's really, that whole, just as Alex and Nicole were saying, and Elena was giving great examples of these intricate food webs all over the place. You just pull out one piece and the whole thing starts to fall apart. And like we're talking with sediment flow and that sort of thing and sewage, in Norwalk Harbor, since they have been collecting data for so long, they actually showed over the last 30 years a sandy bottom that was good for winter flounder to use as nursery ground, turning to muck. And now the flounder aren't there. And they did fish trawls over 30 years, and they published the data this last year, and it showed both fewer fish and less diverse species, so a lot of less different kinds. And that's what we're facing in Long Island Sound. Even though we've cleaned up a lot of sewage systems and we've cleaned up a lot of the plants, there's just chronic pressure. So in order to get back to where we want to be, we need big moves now. We need big, bold policy changes. We need money invested where it needs to be invested, and we need a big vision. And these little systems hopefully give us the energy to remind us why we want to do that. And I have a lot of hope. I think we're going to be able to have these beautiful systems full of alewives when Alex and Nicole do all their planning, and we remove all these dams, and you'll be in a heavily industrialized, say, Westchester County town, and there'll be a big run of alewives going by, and the water will be clean. And you'll be able to go to the beach and eat the clams. I mean, it may be 40, 50 years. It might be sooner, but I mean, that's why we're all doing this.
That's great. Takes a village to clean our water. Thanks, Bill. Does anybody else have anything to add? Our audience? Well, it is almost 8:45. What I'll do is I'll wrap up, and then if anybody has anything to add at the end, if they think of something, please feel free to raise your hand or just speak. I want to thank all of our panelists, not only for being panelists, but for all your work at Save the Sound. You are awesome colleagues, and I've learned so much from all the stuff that you do, and especially working with Nicole actually in the rain garden, digging in the dirt with her. She's a taskmaster. So thank you very much for all your work with that. Because we can't possibly know and do everything. We count on people like you and our citizen watchdogs and activists and all of our partners like state agencies, legislators, and other organizations to help out, similar to what Bill mentioned. We'll be continuing this film series every other Wednesday, so you can catch the next one on Wednesday, May 20th. We don't have a film yet. We're still pontificating, but you can check out how to sign up for that on our Stay Engaged page. Again, that's savethesound.org/stayengaged. But next Wednesday, May 13th, you'll get to catch Soundkeeper Bill for the webinar, Protecting Your Region's Forage Fish. And that's at noon. You can sign up for that and all of the webinars also on that Stay Engaged page. And on that same page, you'll also find information for our upcoming film events, but other webinars that we've already done, and it links to our digital archive as well. And while you're on the website, you'll notice a pretty little yellow button that says donate. It's a hard time for everyone right now, but if you have the ability to help out, we'd be so grateful. Any little bit helps. We couldn't do it without folks like you. With that, I'll open it up for any last thoughts from our panelists or the audience. No.
Well, thank you, Melissa, for hosting.
Sure.
Yeah,
Anthony, any other plugs you want to give for At Home in New Haven?
No more plugs. This was a great session. I appreciate everyone coming out for it, and thanks to my friends and colleagues at Save the Sound for letting me take a week off work to run out At Home in New Haven this week. I appreciate all of you, and I look forward to seeing everyone at more sessions this week. So be well.
Thanks, Anthony, and I wish everybody good health, safety, and thanks for joining us, and definitely check out savethesound.org. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.